This next lesson is about creating a main method in Scala 3. And this is really important because a main method is the method that starts your application. And they refer to that as the entry point or the starting point of your application. And I have some examples in the book, but what I'll do is I'll switch over to here and to here. So a main method is exactly the same as a method. So I could say hello, and we'll just make this one return unit, and I'll put it on a separate line here. And then I can do the typical hello world. And so this is what we call a function or a method. And the main method, you just put the main annotation on that. So the annotation can be above like that, or it can be here. I usually do it like this, but I've seen other people do it above like that. And that's all that there is to a main method, or at least that's the very basics of a main method. So now I'll go ahead and save that and note that this is in the file hello.scala. So now I can come over here and say Scala CLI hello.scala. And I haven't run this yet today, so you see that little bit of work, and then we get the hello world output. And I didn't show my directory initially, but this is what that directory looks like. And I just ran this little file there, the hello.scala. And I also didn't note that I ran that with Scala CLI, so it was Scala CLI hello.scala. And the great thing about Scala CLI is that it just goes ahead and compiles and runs that program right away, just like that by default. And there are other options, so I could just say I want to do a Scala CLI compile hello.scala, and that compiles it. And if you want to run it, you could specify run like that, but run is the default behavior, so I just do that, and that runs that like that. But getting back to our main method, so this was a main method. I named it hello, and it doesn't take any input parameters, and all it does is print to standard out right there. Another one to look at here, and I created these so you don't have to watch me type all the time. But this guy, again, is an @main method, and I also named it hello to show that you can name that anything. I'll change that to hi. The key about this guy is that it's now going to take one input parameter. So it's going to take an input parameter, which I name name, and then I use that variable name right here in the print line. So when we go back over here, again, that one was named hello name. So now I'm going to do Scala CLI hello name.scala. Whoops. And actually, that's a good point there. This one is expecting this one input parameter name. So it fails like this, and this is actually what it should do. It fails right here, and it says, I'm expecting more command line arguments. And the way you do this with Scala CLI is you have to put those arguments after a couple of dashes like that. So you do that, and it says hello that way. So this is saying Scala CLI run this little application dash dash, and then you put your command line parameters here. So that could be Alvin, and that could be Fred. Then if you put like John Doe, you see what happens in this case is that it ignores the Doe as the other parameter and it just prints John. Understanding these parameters becomes more important as we go along. So this next example is called hello name and age. And so the initial setup is the same. We have the @main annotation. We define a function, again named hello. And then this guy takes two input parameters. One is name, which is a string, and the other one is age, which is an int. And then I print them out here just as I printed out the previous ones before. So that's hello name age. So again, we do Scala CLI, and I'll ignore those parameters to begin with. Hello name age, and it'll compile, run, and fail because it says it needs more arguments. And I'll say Alvin. And I'll intentionally do an error here, and I'll say that I am, how can I do this? I'll just do that. Oops, sorry, I do that wrong all the time. I forget this dash dash stuff here. So you need dash dash before those input parameters. And now we get what I was expecting was I gave it two strings right here, and it was expecting an int for the second parameter. So then I get a Java laying number format exception for this second one, the high. So if I put in 33 there, then you would see that work. So my point here was going to be, while I like the idea of being able to accept parameters here as a string and an int, the reality is that the failure happens here and it's outside of your control. So what I'm thinking is it kind of depends on you want to control the errors or whether you want the Scala compiler and interpreter to control your error messages. So what I am thinking here is I don't like this, the way that works. So let me copy that guy, do that, come here, what's the old saying? Code is worth 1,000 words or something like that. So what I would prefer is to do something like that, make both of those strings, and you come back here, and now you can see that's going to run, and that's going to run as well. And then what I would do here, and I don't want to get into all of it, but I would convert, I would call that one like an age string, and then I could say val age equal, and then I could do age string dot to int. And this guy here, this line can fail, so then you'd want to do some error handling right there. But I'm not going to deal with that right now, and then we'll just say, let's do that again. And so now this fails, but now it's at least failing inside my application right here. So then I could do the usual try-catch stuff on this line and then deal with that here. So I know I was kind of stumbling there while I was talking, but the point I'm trying to make is you can either do your own error handling, which I usually prefer, especially if I'm going to give my code to somebody else. I want to deal with the errors myself. But if you're just writing a small script and you don't care about how the errors happen or where they come from, then you can declare, int parameters here. You can create doubles. And then I just want to show one more example. So far, I've shown the @main method. So @main before a function or method definition right there. And if you need to, this is kind of the way we did things in Scala 2, except for the formatting. Of course, formatting is a little different in Scala 2, but we would use a main method. So this one now has to be called main, and it has to exist inside of an object. And then it takes these parameters. So if you use Java, you've seen this type signature before. And in fact, you've probably seen all this type signature right here before. It's just slightly different in Scala than it is in Java. But this is what we did in Scala 2, and it still works in Scala 3. What I am doing here is I take those arguments as an array of string, I return nothing, and then I do, for each argument that you give me, sorry, I'll do that again. For each argument that you give me in the list of arguments, I'm going to go ahead and print those. So if I come back over here, I've already done that. So Scala, CLI, what am I doing here? This one's called hello. Scala2.scala, and so go ahead and run that. You don't see any output because I didn't give it any command line parameters. Oops. Now if I give it command line parameters like that, and again I make that error, and then we do that, and you'll see the result right there. So if for some reason you need to use this or prefer to use this, I wanted to make sure I showed this style as well. So I want to show one more piece of information, and I was going to say this is a bonus, but it's not really a bonus. We're kind of in this weird world right now where right now we have, I guess it's transition state. So right now we have to use Scala CLI to run things, or I have been using this to run things, but you can also use Scala C to compile code, and then you can use Scala to run code. And again, this is because we're kind of in this transition phase right now. So what I mean by that is we have this file with this main method, and it's called hello.scala. And I can run it like this. So this compiles and runs it as I showed before. And that's great, that all works fine. And now let me clean up this directory real quick. So get rid of those class files. So now the way things used to work is that we would say Scala C, and again, this is the compile part. So I call that one hello.scala. So Scala C is going to compile this, and notice it actually takes longer to compile this than it did to compile and run it with Scala CLI. So I think that's pretty cool. That's the first thing noticed. There's also no output because all I did was compile that, and then it created these class files right here. So if I do ls-1, you can see that it created these class files and this tasty file. And tasty is a new file format that comes with Scala 3. And I won't get into that now, but I may cover that in a future course. But what happens in the Java world, and I think Kotlin as well, is when you compile code for the JVM, it creates these class files like that one and that one. And now what's happened in Scala 3 is that it also generates these tasty files. And the reason for these is that they're a little more, what's the word I'm looking for, compatible. There's things that they can do in tasty files that they can do. Like a class file is something that has to run on the JVM. So your code is compiled and then made to run on the JVM in these class files. Tasty files don't really have anything to do with the JVM. So the creators of Scala can put anything in these tasty files they want. And by doing that, that makes the code more flexible. So the way it works is like Scala 3 code can actually work with Scala 2.13 code. And that, I believe that functionality comes from these tasty files. But anyway, getting back to my point, I just ran the Scala C command right there like that. And now, if I were to come in here, I want to say I want to run that code. I could say Scala space hello, and kaboom. And what's going on here? It says wrong name, so I typed in hello with a capital H, and it's saying that the correct name should be lowercase h. So we come back here. Yep, sure enough, I created my method with a lowercase h. So to run that guy, I need to make that lowercase and then run. And again, I just show this to show the way things were, or the way things are with Scala 2, and the way things are if you don't want to use Scala CLI. So you can see it's a little bit more work. But perhaps as one side effect, beneficial side effect, you get to see how things work a little bit more with this compilation phase. Where Scala CLI hides a lot of this information, when you use Scala C followed by Scala, you actually get to see these details. And finally, if I come back here and look at the book on the main method chapter, now one thing I didn't show here in my examples are these top level variables. So it's actually easier to go back to the code. So let's do this one more time. How about val x equals 100? So this is a top level variable, and you can also have top level functions. So you can have def double. How about this one takes an I as an int, and it's going to return an int. And then we say I times 2. So it's top level variable, top level function. And then we come down here. Let's get rid of that. And I'm not taking any input parameters right here, so I will just take that x and then I'll double it. So this will be a little weird. So I'll say $x time, to be clear, times 2 equals, and then I will say double x. If I did everything right, then we're going to run this hello file here. So clear Scala CLI hello Scala. And there we go. So 100 times 2 equals 100 is that output. And all I'm showing here are other things that you can put in files. So it's kind of cool because now Scala is more like a scripting language. In Scala 2, you could not put things like this out here in the open. They all had to be like inside of classes and traits and objects. But now with Scala 3, they don't have to be. So they call these top level members, or this is a top level field, top level function. And then I use those inside of this main method right there.